as of nearly 2 hours ago now, midnight in Washington, 9:30 a.m. in Delhi, most Indian goods imported into the US face a 50% tariff.
A quiet policy shift from New Delhi has unexpectedly shaken the world, and millions of American families are now facing an impossible choice: pay for their medication or keep a roof over their heads. When the Trump administration announced a 50% tariff on imports from India, few expected the first consequences to be felt at the pharmacy counter. But within weeks, India began tightening its pharmaceutical exports, and the true cost of a trade war became clear. This isn't just about GDP or trade deficits. It's about the pills patients can no longer afford. India's response wasn't loud or theatrical. There were no angry headlines or diplomatic fireworks. Instead, New Delhi responded subtly, slowing production, delaying shipments, and diverting supplies to other countries. It was enough to send shockwaves through the US healthcare system. In today's interconnected global economy, a tariff decision in Washington can quickly become a matter of life or death for families thousands of miles away. The US is already struggling with ongoing shortages of prescription drugs, and those shortages are now deepening. Pharmacists across the country are raising the alarm. Hundreds of essential medications are in short supply. If you've had trouble getting a prescription filled lately, or finding common over-the-counter medicine, you're not alone. Many people still view trade wars as distant political drama, but the moment you open your medicine cabinet and see the prices have tripled, it stops being political. It becomes personal. This quiet crisis began in August 2025, when Washington slapped a 50% tariff on imports from India as part of a broader effort to bring manufacturing back to the US on paper. It looked like a tough economic move. Buried in the fine print, however, was a key detail. Pharmaceuticals were on the list, and that was enough to spark a health crisis. India didn't retaliate with bluster. It simply made quiet changes that disrupted the flow of medicine to the US. No bans. No bold statements, just enough friction to unbalance the system. What many Americans don't realize is that more than 40% of all generic drugs sold in the US are made in India. That's not just a trade figure. It's the backbone of affordable healthcare in America. When that link breaks, the impact ripples into every hospital, every pharmacy, every home. And we're not talking about rare or specialized drugs. These are the basics: antibiotics, insulin, blood pressure pills, cancer treatments. Medications people need every day to live, work, and survive. For years, India produced these drugs at a fraction of the cost, sometimes 70% less than US manufacturers. That's why they became so widely used. But once that 40% supply line tightened, the effects were felt immediately. Not in economic charts, but in empty pharmacy shelves. Prices soared. Patients left without the medicine they needed. What started as a trade policy soon revealed its real cost, one prescription at a time. At first, it seemed like minor delays, a few missing items here and there. But within weeks, it spiraled into a full-blown crisis. Across the country, patients now face the grim reality: basic medicine is becoming a luxury. Not in far-off places, but in cities like Chicago, Dallas, and Miami. People are skipping doses, cutting pills in half, or abandoning treatment altogether. Not out of choice, but because they simply can't afford otherwise. The stories are heartbreaking. A diabetic left without insulin. A cancer patient waiting weeks for chemotherapy. A 76-year-old man in Texas saw his heart medication jump from $28 to $91 in 1 month, accompanied only by a note from the pharmacist. Imports had been disrupted. No official explanation, no emergency hotline, just a harsh decision between rent and medicine, and he's far from alone. This isn't a short-term glitch. It's the slow unraveling of a healthcare system that millions depend on. When 40% of generic drugs vanish, it's not the pharmaceutical CEOs who suffer. It's the mother choosing between food and antibiotics for her child, the father praying his child pulls through, the elderly wondering if their medication will last until the end of the month. The irony is painful. The people most affected by this never voted on tariffs. never sat in on trade negotiations, and never imagined a geopolitical decision would one day rob them of the drugs they need to live. So where do things stand now? While politicians argue over economic data, everyday Americans are counting the pills left in their bottles. And behind this quiet emergency, the world is already moving on. India, instead of escalating the fight, simply rerouted its trade. Medications are now flowing to Africa, Latin America, and parts of Europe. Meanwhile, the US, once a central player in shaping global healthcare, finds itself sidelined. For decades, it encouraged India to become the pharmacy of the world. Now, that very lifeline is slipping away. What was once considered a smart, cost-saving decision is now revealed as a dangerous dependency, and it's breaking down. There are no explosions, no breaking news alerts, just emergencies that didn't need to happen, funerals that shouldn't have taken place, and one bitter truth: medicine doesn't care about politics, but politics decides whether you get the medicine you need to live. As patients line up outside pharmacies, Washington scrambles behind closed doors. The White House has entered emergency mode, calling in FDA officials, national security advisors, and pharmaceutical companies. They're debating how to unlock the national medicine stockpile, ramp up domestic production, and reroute imports through third countries. The urgency is real, but so is the delay. And for millions of Americans, the crisis is already here. Even the most hopeful projections admit that restoring a stable supply of medicine will take at least 6 months, possibly a full year. And that's assuming India doesn't escalate things further. But why would it stop now? While Washington scrambles to fix the growing gaps in the healthcare system, India has already begun quietly redrawing the global trade map to its advantage. Rather than lashing out, India is strategically strengthening its ties with fellow BRICS nations: Brazil, Russia, China, and South Africa. Together, they're forming what could become an informal health belt, an alliance not just focused on pharmaceuticals, but on reshaping global access to healthcare itself. This shift isn't an act of retaliation. It's a realignment, and this time, the United States isn't at the center. For decades, Washington championed India as the pharmacy of the world, a move that brought American consumers the benefits of cheaper insurance premiums, lower co-payments, and access to affordable generic drugs. But now, the very system the US helped create is being leveraged in new directions, faster and more strategically than anyone anticipated. No press release can fully capture the scale of this shift, and no headline can keep up with how quickly it's happening. But the signs are undeniable. America's long-held dominance in pharmaceutical supply chains is fading. Not because India is seeking conflict, but because the rest of the world is ready to move forward without waiting for Washington. While US officials continue to insist the situation is under control, many Americans are beginning to wonder, how long will it actually take? A year? Longer? And what will happen in the meantime? What started as a foreign policy move has now exposed some of the deepest cracks in America's own foundation. This crisis isn't just about empty shelves in pharmacies. It's about an entire system that's built on trust, now being tested like never before. In healthcare, everything is based on numbers: insurance premiums, co-pays, coverage limits. These calculations were all made with the assumption that the global supply chain would function smoothly. But when up to 40% of generic medicines suddenly disappear, those numbers no longer mean anything. Insurance companies are now facing costs they simply can't absorb. And when the math no longer works, there's only one answer: shift the burden to patients. For those with little or no insurance, this isn't about rising costs anymore. It's a complete barrier. As more and more essential medicines fall off insurance coverage lists, people living paycheck to paycheck are learning a hard truth. Access to healthcare was never as guaranteed as they thought. A flaw in the system that had long been hidden is now out in the open. Some might argue that a country as wealthy as the United States should be able to recover on its own. But the hard reality is that a single policy change halfway across the world can leave millions of Americans without blood pressure medication, insulin, or antibiotics. At that point, the conversation is no longer about economics, it's about survival. And let's be clear, This crisis didn't arrive without warning. The risks were known. The dependency on foreign drug production had been flagged. Yet here we are, patients now bargaining at pharmacy counters like they're in a marketplace. The only difference is they're not haggling for souvenirs. They're bargaining for time, for treatment, for life. Perhaps the most devastating loss isn't the medicine itself, it's trust. For years, Americans were told that while their healthcare system was expensive, at least it was reliable. That illusion has now been shattered. If 40% of the drug supply can vanish almost overnight due to a single trade decision, then what was the system really built on? Was it ever truly secure, or just a fragile illusion? Maybe the most bitter pill to swallow isn't in a bottle. It's the realization that patients were never even considered in these geopolitical games. That 40% figure may sound like a dry statistic, but in truth, it's a red flag. On paper, it's just a number. In practice, it represents nearly half the foundation of America's generic drug supply, and it reveals a deep vulnerability. Public health in the US is dangerously reliant on foreign supply chains and political decisions far beyond the control of the people who actually depend on the medications. What we're seeing now isn't just a temporary disruption, it's a full-blown stress test. One the system was clearly not prepared to face. Cracks are spreading, from pharmacies to hospitals to households. And they're hitting the one thing the entire system depends on: public trust. This is no longer a trade issue. This is about life. Who can make their prescription stretch another month? Who can afford one more dose? Who gets another shot at survival? So the question becomes, will this 40% shortfall shape the future of American healthcare? Or will it finally be the wake-up call that sparks real reform? This isn't just data. This is about survival. If you believe that access to medicine should never be reduced to a bargaining chip in a political chess match, then now is the time to speak up. Share your story. Share your fears. Let your experience be heard. Send this message to those who still believe that tariffs and trade wars are abstract concepts with no real-world consequences. And remember, staying informed is your first line of defense in an unpredictable world. And just when the focus was on healthcare, another shock hit the headlines. Two of Asia's biggest economies, India and China, simultaneously imposed 100% tariffs on iPhones, plunging Apple into its most serious crisis in a decade. It sounded almost unbelievable, but it's real. India, once considered one of Washington's closest allies, has now aligned itself with China, America's most powerful economic rival. And Apple, with billions invested in Indian production lines and millions of pending orders, is now stuck in a trade deadlock. In a matter of days, multi-billion-dollar trade agreements collapsed, sending shockwaves through the tech industry and leaving US officials scrambling for answers. In August 2025, the Trump administration imposed a surprise 50% tariff on all imports from India, including electronics. For a nation that had long been a key part of America's Indo-Pacific strategy, the move wasn't just unexpected, it was a diplomatic earthquake. Now, Apple finds itself trapped in a geopolitical standoff, and the rest of the world is watching closely as the consequences of these trade decisions continue to unfold across healthcare, technology, and beyond. Analysts agree, this is one of the toughest tariff actions the United States has ever taken against a longtime ally. Officially, Washington pointed to national security concerns, claiming that India's continued imports of Russian oil pose a direct threat to US strategic interests. But behind these carefully worded statements lies a much messier and more complex reality. This decision has forced Apple, and, more broadly, the entire US tech industry, into a direct confrontation with the very supply chain it has spent years trying to rebuild. To understand the full scope of the risk, it's important to remember how quickly India rose from a peripheral player to a critical hub in the iPhone manufacturing process. By the second quarter of 2025, a staggering 71% of iPhones sold in the United States were no longer assembled in China, but in India. That number isn't just a symbol, it's the result of a deliberate and rapid strategic shift. Between March and May alone, factories in India exported around $3.2 billion worth of iPhones, with 97% shipped directly to the US. This wasn't just routine trade, it was clear evidence of growing interdependence. As iPhone exports from India surged by 76% year over year, shipments from China declined by nearly the same margin. The data tells a simple story. Production was leaving China and rapidly moving to India. But now, that carefully planned shift is at risk, disrupted by geopolitics. According to the Wall Street Journal, India now produces roughly 14% of all iPhones worldwide. That share is projected to rise sharply as billions of dollars from Foxconn, Tata, and generous Indian government subsidies continue to fuel tech manufacturing growth. Against that backdrop, Washington's decision to impose tariffs hits like a gut punch, not only to New Delhi, but to Apple as well. What was originally intended as a tool of foreign policy pressure is now threatening to unravel the very supply chain strategy Apple has spent years developing. Ironically, instead of safeguarding national interests, this move may have set off a ticking time bomb inside America's tech sector. The fallout came fast, and it extended far beyond balance sheets. At the center of it all is Apple. If iPhones assembled in India lose their tariff exemptions and are hit with a 50% import duty, the consequences will be serious. Production costs will skyrocket. The global supply chain will be thrown into chaos. Apple's pricing model, carefully calculated across dozens of markets, could collapse. For a company built on tight margins and precision logistics, this isn't just a temporary problem. It's an existential threat. It also undermines Apple's years-long effort to shift production out of China and into India. A strategy designed not only for cost efficiency, but also to reduce geopolitical risk. That supposed safety net is now fraying. In Tamil Nadu, a Foxconn plant employing over 40,000 workers, most of them women, has become a flagship for India's Make in India dream. Billions of dollars have poured into not just factories, but also into the hope that India would become a cornerstone of the global tech supply chain. Now, that foundation is under serious pressure. As confidence weakens and business uncertainty grows, the once bright outlook is beginning to dim. But this is no longer just Apple's problem. It's becoming a political issue for India. The backlash at home is growing. In Punjab, farmers have taken to the streets, burning effigies of President Trump and calling the tariffs an attack on national sovereignty. The narrative has moved beyond iPhones. It now touches on national pride, identity, and India's role on the world stage. For Washington, this could become a dangerous miscalculation. Tariffs were intended to create leverage. Instead, they've provoked defiance. Indian officials have begun hinting that the entire investment climate for American companies is up for review. The message to global businesses is crystal clear. Policy stability in India is no longer guaranteed. Even India's strongest export industries are beginning to feel the pressure. Companies are being forced to reassess: should they keep investing in a now volatile market, or look for safer alternatives elsewhere? This isn't just a trade dispute anymore. It's a broader power shift, and both sides risk losing more than they gain. The international response to America's aggressive tariff move has been swift. Apple, at the epicenter of this economic earthquake, responded by announcing a $100 billion investment to expand production in the US. It's not a retreat, it's a survival tactic, a way to shield itself from rising geopolitical risk and supply chain chaos. India, on the other hand, has stood firm. The Ministry of External Affairs called the tariffs unreasonable and stated clearly that India will not bow to external pressure. This strong language shows that India is no longer content to play a secondary role. It now sees itself as an independent global power. Global media outlets are framing this standoff as a geopolitical turning point. A realignment in global power structures is underway, and everyone is watching. The Wall Street Journal described Apple's move into India as smart risk management. Meanwhile, the Times of India warned that China is quietly pressuring Apple by tightening its grip on key tech components and services. In Australia, Analysts estimated that US consumers could lose up to $123 billion in purchasing power if prices keep rising, while Apple may face $1.4 billion in tariffs in just one quarter. This is no longer a story about tariffs. It's about identity, power, and who controls the rules of global trade. As countries and corporations reposition themselves, the very structure of globalization is being reshaped. The US, India, Apple, and China are all being pulled into a new, more fragmented world order, one where no single player holds all the cards. The impact of this economic clash goes far beyond import numbers. It's disrupting technology, trade flows, consumer spending, and even political alliances. The tech sector is already feeling the first tremors, especially companies like Apple that rely on precision, speed, and global coordination. And as those tremors turn into quakes, one thing becomes clear: this is just the beginning. Apple's once rock-solid launch schedules, long considered untouchable, are now in jeopardy. If production in India slows or stalls, the impact won't just be limited to factory floors. It will trigger a chain reaction, disrupting everything from product development to global marketing campaigns and retail rollouts. For a brand like Apple, which thrives on media buzz and precise, highly choreographed product launches, this isn't just a minor logistics issue. It's a serious threat to the brand's global momentum. This growing tension isn't just shaking up tech, it's also altering the course of global trade. US-India relations, once seen as a key counterbalance to China's rising influence, are showing signs of strain. In response, India has begun quietly widening its economic and strategic partnerships, not just with Russia, but even with China itself. This isn't driven by shared values, but by a new reality: survival in an increasingly fragmented world. What we're witnessing is a silent redrawing of global trade routes. And for the first time in decades, Washington is no longer the automatic center of gravity. Consumers are also starting to feel the effects. As tariffs stack up and inflation rises, the prices of high-tech goods are climbing fast. What were once considered premium products are now sliding further out of reach for many households. At the heart of it all is a clear geopolitical shift. India is embracing a new approach, one that doesn't lean fully towards the West or the East, but instead aims for a balanced, multipolar position on the world stage. This isn't rebellion. It's a redefinition of India's role in global affairs. And this moment marks more than a policy shift. It signals a deeper divide, one that no industry is safe from. The heavy-handed tariffs introduced under Trump haven't just targeted India. They've rattled the very foundation of Apple's Make in India strategy. What was once a calculated move to reduce dependence on China has now become a glaring vulnerability. India, for its part, is no longer sitting on the sidelines. New Delhi is stepping forward as a sovereign power, ready to challenge Washington's pressure and carve out its own strategic path. This isn't a rash decision, it's a clear message. The world has moved on from the rigid alliances of the Cold War era. For Apple, the challenges are stacking up fast: punitive tariffs, production instability, and rising political friction. The company now faces a far more complex question than how to build an iPhone. It must decide where to build it, and under what geopolitical conditions. Will Apple continue investing heavily in India? Or will it be forced to shift gears yet again? Can the United States adjust its trade policy in time to hold on to its influence and strategic partners? And as India positions itself between global powers, will it succeed in building a stable, multipolar alliance, or find itself pulled closer to China? This isn't just a short-term conflict. It's the beginning of a major global realignment, and the implications aren't limited to diplomats or CEOs. They affect all of us. What do you think Apple should do to protect its supply chain? How should Washington respond to preserve its global position? Let us know your thoughts, because these shifts will shape the future for years to come. Please subscribe to the Timefold channel, and don't forget to like and share.